Welcome back. I will be your moderator for the second panel. So, we are really excited to present the second panel, and they will be discussing heritage, history, equity, and opportunity. Our first panelist is Kevin Beverly, President and CEO of Social and Scientific Systems. Kevin?
Good morning. I first would like to just say welcome to the Henson Leadership Conference. Again, I, like many of the panelists who showed up earlier this morning, really didn't have an understanding of who Mr. Henson was until about a year ago when Catherine sort of engaged me and then started to talk to me about this project that she was engaged in, and it took some time to try and understand a little bit about his background and understanding about what he did here in Montgomery County and where he ended up and finished his life. I'd also like to thank Montgomery Media for hosting this and PEPCO for being a sponsor. I think recognize that these things don't happen without sponsorship, so appreciate PEPCO for doing that. So I'm going to start out with, just as I listened to the others talk this morning, and I really didn't intend to give an anecdote that was personal about this. I really was going to focus on something else, but as I listened to it, and then the topic that we have for us to talk about this morning around equity and opportunity, listening to those stories, something resonated with me. So I'm going to give you a little anecdote of my own that I think brings the whole equity and opportunity maybe into a little different perspective. So I'm not a Montgomery County resident. I grew up in Dorchester County on the eastern shore of Maryland. We had our own historical figure, Aramita Ross, who most of you may know as Harriet Tubman. She grew up, her homestead is about 5 miles from where I grew up, an area called Madison. I grew up on a little island out in the Chesapeake called Taylor's. And so I went to a one-room schoolhouse. I'm not that old. I'm old enough, but I'm not that old that should have been my path at that time, but it was. The Eastern Shore was a little different. So I go to a one-room schoolhouse. Cambridge, Maryland was the place where high school happened, junior high school happened. And I've got a brother who's 10 years older than I am. And as that's going on, my brother is already gone. So I'm 10 years old, dad leaves home. My brother comes back, and I'm about ready to go to middle school or enter the 7th grade. And my brother, who's 10 years old, is at Morgan State, comes home, and he says, "You're not going to Maces Lane High School." I go, "What do you mean I'm not going to Maces Lane High School?" My sister's already in Maces Lane High School. Every cousin I have on our little road is going to Maces Lane High School. And I said, "Where am I going?" "So you're going to Cambridge Junior High School." And I said, "That's a white school. Why am I going there?" And he said, "It's about opportunity." I didn't know what he was talking about at the time, but he said, "This is about opportunity." I went to Maces Lane High School. And while there are opportunities, it's a new world. At that point, integration was happening in the rest of the country and in the state of Maryland, but it really hadn't happened in Cambridge. Cambridge, you had two separate school systems, and you had the opportunity to go to whichever school you wanted to if you were in Cambridge. And of course, the blacks chose Maces Lane, the whites chose Cambridge High School. At least some of them, most of the blacks went to Maces Lane. There were a couple who didn't. My brother, I was on Taylor's Island, so didn't have a preference, couldn't force me one place or another. And my brother decided, "You're going to this school." So I went there. I was one of 7. And it was a tough time. My dad had just kind of split on us, was struggling with that. My brother's in my ear. So I'm about 5'8". My brother's about 6'1", good-sized guy. And so when he said something, I really didn't have much choice into whether or not I was going to do it or not. But there I am. I get through in 7th grade, and it's hard, a little different. I mean, the curriculum was challenging. Everything about it was just hard. So then 8th grade rolls around, and they integrate. This is now in everybody's. They got one school system. There's 7 through 9, and then 10 through 12. So I'm my own personal experience here about what equity and opportunity really means. Because when I got to 8th grade, I had my own cousins, all of whom had gone to Mace's Lane. And what surprised me when I got in 8th grade is how much further along I was than any of my cousins. I don't think I was any brighter than any of them. But the opportunity and the equity of what was going on in one of those school systems versus the other was dramatic. And so I got that personal experience early and had the opportunity, later on as I progressed through high school and end up at the University of Maryland in College Park, to there again see that same pattern of a school and a state who, again, very progressive, trying to figure this out, trying to put in perspective this equity and opportunity issue. And so I come there. I've actually done pretty well. I've got good grades. I've done well on all the standardized tests. And then I end up with kids out of Baltimore City who had not had those same opportunities. It was dealing with a attrition rate that was somewhere in the 90s of African Americans enrolling at the University of Maryland in College Park, and the majority of us failing, not getting through that, forget the first year, getting through that first semester. Because you can imagine when you're not quite sure how it's going, you're in this spot, and the first thing you see is, the first thing you get is that grade report, and it says academic probation. That's really inspiring you to go back, huh? It's not where you're not really thinking about this. You're already worried that you're not in the right place, and now they just confirmed it for you. Becomes a really different opportunity when you think about it. So I start there. And that's my little story, of my own personal story of equity and opportunity, because it did become clear to me that this was something important, that in education, if we don't provide our young people of color with those opportunities and mentors and hope, that they won't succeed. So it's very important that people like Mr. Henson and Ms. Tubman are recognized for the leadership that they actually did provide all of us as we were attempting to, bridge these gaps of getting from point A to success. So let me start with, the topic today. Like I said, I'm an Eastern Shore boy, and when I think about Mr. Henson, I think about Ms. Tubman and what they did. They were both runaway slaves who created a different type of entrepreneurship. Theirs was a social entrepreneurism that had freedom as its reward. So with regard to our topic today around equity and opportunity, I want to start by wanting to explore a little bit into this conversation about social entrepreneurship and want to bring that to this conversation. So I believe that the intersection of government, business, and philanthropy has the potential to bridge the equity and opportunity gaps that exist for our most vulnerable in this community. Working together as Ms. Tubman did with the Underground Railroad and Mr. Henson did with the settlement of Dawn, I believe that aligning and coordinating these forces give us the best chance to create career pathways for our disaffected youth, our unemployed, and our underemployed. We're going through a transformation in this county. The downturn of 2008 taught us some lessons about the limitations of government and introduced some new realities. We need to learn from the lessons and embrace the realities. Government can't solve all these problems. And if we take the example of Mr. Henson and Ms. Tubman, they didn't really have that option. As a matter of fact, it was those policies of government that actually were holding them back. So when you think about that time in history and government policies as a problem, we think about what we should do in terms of bringing government and business into this in a little different way. So we need greater business investment in social entrepreneurship for our nonprofit programs, investing in programs that create value and not just a tier when we talk about their impact. That's an important point for me. We need to coordinate philanthropy that looks at the whole problem that faces the constituent populations and partners with government and business to solve that problem. It's part of what we're trying to build in a county that has a progressive history, a past that they've embraced in a new environment of a county that's become majority minority. And unlike other places around this beltway where it's not so embraced, it's really important to understand how Montgomery County is embracing it and how our county government is interacting with business, with philanthropy, and how they are bringing those forces together to make the kind of change that I think are going to be necessary. Because as we sit and look at our federal government and the discourse, we look at how state government and its discourse, it really does happen. How you create value, how you create equity and opportunity, it's at a local level. When you hear, Tom and Donna talk about what PEPCO's doing and the personal part of how they are engaged in their communities to do this, it's an important concept. Because leadership around these topics, we can look to political leaders, but we really don't have to look any further than the person next to you. Think about what you're doing, what I'm doing, what my two colleagues on the panel are doing to actually push those difficult questions out in the light and have them be addressed. And with that, I'll end and we'll take a chance to talk to you later. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you for sharing your personal story. And the big takeaway is we really do need to invest in social entrepreneurship. So thank you. Our next speaker is Michelle Graham Hicks, Communication Strategist at Graham Strategic Solutions. Michelle?
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning, and I won't take too much of your time. In November 2014, after 20 years of leading and managing communications and marketing teams for a large federal contractor, I started my own small communications practice. That seed of entrepreneurship for me was planted a long time ago, many generations ago. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We spent a good deal of time, and we've taken a lot of time this morning, talking about initiatives, policies, and programs that need to be strengthened or put into place to achieve equity and opportunity. And I agree that we must continue to push these efforts forward. I'd like to take some time this morning, though, to offer another strategy that I think we need to add back into the mix. It's evident by all that we've heard about Josiah Henson that he was a great leader with a compelling legacy built on foundations of education, self-sufficiency, entrepreneurism, and high ethical standards. For me, a noteworthy quality when I was reading about his history was his persistence in telling his own story. In an article titled Controlling the Narrative, Why Blacks Need to Own More Media Outlets, recently posted on AtlantaBlackStar.com, James Klingman writes, "In war, one of the first things the enemy does is destroy his adversary's ability to communicate within its ranks. Chaos likely ensues if a fighting force cannot communicate internally. Individual soldiers end up doing their own thing when left to their own devices. They make decisions based on their individual situations and their individual interest. This allows the enemy to come in and pick them off one by one, using false information and propaganda, instilling fear of being captured or killed, or by making the individual feel abandoned and left with no hope of victory." Judging by his persistence in telling his own story, I believe that Reverend Henson would have agreed with Klingman. Henson first documented a narrative of his life in 1849. In 1852, Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, said to have been inspired by his life, was published. It is worth noting that Reverend Henson didn't allow the telling of his story to end with that novel. Not only did he use the success of the novel to travel and give lectures about his life, he also published 4 updated accounts of the course of his life over the years. As inspired as I am by the historical accounts of Reverend Henson's life, I'd like to believe that his story also inspired his children, their children, and others in his family and surrounding community, much like the stories I heard from my parents and my family members continue to inspire me to work hard, to reach out and help others, to strive for excellence, and yes, to start my own business. My parents grew up on rural farms, my mom in North Carolina, my dad in Georgia. There was little money, but both had incredibly strong families that worked together and within their communities to make a good life, not just for themselves, but for the surrounding community and for generations to follow. Education was a cornerstone in our family then and remains so now. My great uncles, aunts, cousins on both sides of my family worked to ensure that their children received education, the best education they could possibly find for them. They made sure that schools were opened in the community. They served as teachers and as bus drivers. My mom's grandfather owned a big farm in North Carolina and gave a parcel of his land to the county to build a school. In that, it was a one-room school for grades 1 through 6, and my great aunt was the teacher. The majority of my mom's family attended that school and continued on in their education to graduate from colleges and technical schools. My dad often tells the story of how one day his father told him he had to stop going to high school so that he could plow the fields while my grandfather worked elsewhere. My dad's mom, insistent that he graduate from high school, plowed the fields in his place during the day without my grandfather knowing it, so my dad could go to school. And when he came home from school, he took her place behind the mule to continue plowing so that when my grandfather came home, he would be none the wiser. My dad's family paid for each child to go to college by harvesting and selling timber on their land. The year my dad was supposed to go to college, he started a fire that got out of control, and it burned down all the timber. So his opportunity to go to school was ended. He went to the Navy, but he did earn his college degree much later in life after I was born, because he too was brought up with the value and the need to get a good education, to get as much education as possible. Growing up, I witnessed the sacrifices my parents made for me and my sister, and my grandparents and their parents, hearing the stories of my grandparents and their parents and the sacrifices they made, how they opened doors to those in need, and how they worked not only within the family unit, but also in the larger community so that everyone could rise. Stories have power. They delight, enchant, touch, teach, recall, inspire, motivate, and challenge. They help us understand. Since the beginning of time, storytelling has been an important event and a valuable tool in the African and African American communities. Through storytelling, questions were answered, history was conveyed, and lifelong lessons were taught and learned. And yes, there are many problems that we face in the Black community, and there's no shortage of these stories being told. We need to take control of the narrative, though, and flood the atmosphere with our stories of steadfastness, strength, and success. Not just during Black History Month. It's a great opportunity to come together and have these conversations, this dialogue. But we need to tell these stories every day with our families, our friends, and our colleagues. I encourage you all to tell your story, not just the highlights of earning your advanced degrees, building successful businesses, rising up the corporate ladder, or becoming a respected leader in the community. But take a risk. Be a little bit more transparent and share the struggles, the fears, and the failures. Sharing the whole story makes the success appear much more attainable to others, striving to achieve and to arrive. To paraphrase Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the face of all the inequities, injustices, and lack of opportunities we've always faced as a community, it is a miracle that we have survived. And many of us have done more than just survive. We've thrived. By sharing our stories, we can amplify the good and inspire each other to continue to work together toward equity and opportunity for everyone in our community. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you so very much. The takeaway is take control of the narrative. Stories have power. Education is always the foundation to opportunity and equity. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Marie Taylor, President and CEO of Leadership Montgomery. Marie? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm absolutely inspired and by the comments from my colleagues, and so I hope to be as good as them. As Catherine said, I am the new president and CEO of Leadership Montgomery, and proud to have that opportunity. Leadership Montgomery is a 27-year-old leadership capacity and development program organization here in Montgomery County, and I'm proud to be the new president and the second president. Our job at Leadership Montgomery is to engage and inspire community trustees to improve Montgomery County. One of our big roles, which speaks to the panel today, is to be a convener and to have conversations and to focus the community on ways to improve it. So someone asked the question earlier about how do you get these conversations going? One of our roles at Leadership Montgomery is to have these important conversations and to show folks it's actually not that scary and it actually contributes to your bottom line. So that would be my answer to that question. Talk to the businesses about their bottom line, and I'm going to wrap around to that at the end of my comments. So I actually am a DC native. I came to Montgomery County almost 5 years ago while participating in the Leadership Montgomery program, and found Montgomery County a very interesting place as opposed to my work in DC. It's very interesting, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I actually fell into leadership roles. I worked at a corporate organization back in the 90s and really kind of didn't like it. It didn't fit me, didn't fit my life. And so I started working in nonprofits, and I worked for a place called Food and Friends and did a lot of work around HIV activism back in the early 90s when HIV and AIDS was a scary thing. And it was very interesting for me going to these conversations and having these meetings and fighting for funding and finding that I was one of the few persons of color in the room when it was affecting a huge group of people of color. And so it said to me that there's an opportunity missing here for people to actually change the narrative of what's happening in our community and even our destiny, because we're not there to speak up, to advocate, and to represent. And so because of that work at Food and Friends and the fight around HIV and AIDS rights, I really decided that I needed to stay in the leadership role and really find my way up the chain to be one of the brown people in the room talking about what's happening to brown people. I thought it was very important to speak that truth in the narrative. So I have found that as I've worked my way up, my personal narrative and my professional skills have really improved organizations. And I worked really hard. I went back to school. I got my undergrad degree. I got an MBA because I wanted to be one of those people at the table. And I wanted to show organizations and businesses that you're missing an opportunity when you don't look at people who don't look at you, who don't look like you. So I have found that every time I go into the room, I try to be a shining star, an absolute representative, because I'm standing on the shoulders of Mr. Henson. I'm standing on the shoulders of Harriet Tubman. I need people to understand that you're missing some opportunities when you pick people who don't, when you don't pick people who don't look like you. So it's really important, and I try to weave that into every piece of work that I do and make people understand that you're missing some opportunities. So in that vein, let's talk about some of the questions that I ask people and that I even ask myself when working around equity and opportunity. I ask folks, do you know what you're doing in your areas to level the playing field? What does that look like for your organization? What are you doing to level the playing field? What is your company doing to examine institutional racism? And what are you doing about it personally? Are you having those conversations? Because it's absolutely real, even here in MoCo. Finally, what are you doing to be inclusive? And the other question that I ask, which goes back to that point about the bottom line, is, do you realize that if you're not having these conversations about equity and opportunity, that you will not have a future workforce? we are now a majority minority company organization, or county, sorry. I get so passionate I skip what I'm saying. So if we are a majority minority organization, people keep saying it's how many, it's coming, it is here. So what are we doing to cultivate that group that was ignored before? How are you building a workforce that is going to keep your bottom line going? And so I find, particularly nonprofits, when I talk about the bottom line and how it comes to, and how you're going to get there, that's when their heads perk up, right? And then we can have those conversations. And so that is what I'm working on at Leadership Montgomery, and that's what I work on personally every single day. And with that, I'm going to close.
Marie, thank you. You have definitely reiterated, have those conversations, ask those telling, pressing, challenging questions, and be that shining star there. Thank you. We are going to take a 2-minute break, and then we're going to come back for questions. Thank you.
I already knew that I was going to go to college, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science, become the mayor or something, make the situation better for other people. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back. We have our panelists here to answer any questions that you might have. Kevin, Michelle, and Marie. Please ask your questions.
Good morning. I'm Susie Sinclair Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. My question is, we don't talk about that when we talk about our work, and it's going to that difficult conversation again. And what is your advice and feedback for us as an organization that's committed to social justice and equity to bring this issue and lack of unequal opportunity to our people who live in Montgomery County and to engage them in helping our work. I do want to thank Safeway and Pepco, who are not here, because they've been wonderful supporters of our work as well.
So state where you're from.
I'm from Montgomery County, Bethesda, Maryland.
And the name of the...
Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless. I'm Susie Sinclair Smith. Thank you.
I'll go first. I'll jump in. As you know, Susie, I ran a large organization here called Interfaith Works that dealt with the same population. And it was a challenging and amazing job. And I thought it was fascinating when I came from DC to Montgomery County that we weren't having the conversations about who is homeless, why they're homeless, and what they look like. And I remember at one of my first meetings with a nonprofit group saying, I don't even understand why you have the problems you have when you have the money you have. I came from a place where we had $2 to serve thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And it baffled me how we're not directing the funds at what's actually happening here in the county now. So we know it's majority minority. We know that there are people who have never recovered from economic downturn, and that we have not shifted our work and our focus, particularly in the school system, around this group of people and how we can change the work that we're doing. So I don't think it's an issue of money. I think it's an issue of shifting our thinking, having the actual conversations about how to service people who are actually in the county right now where they look like. And so I think the issue that we also have is that we are not talking about it enough. My statement to you is, you just have to say it over and over and over and over again until people realize that this is an issue. I did tours where people thought, I didn't know there was a mobile park home here in Montgomery County. You just need to stay on the crusade, and you need to enlist people to stay on the crusade to talk about the actual reality here. Because it's not impossible to solve the issue, but if we don't have the conversation, continue to have the conversation, we're not gonna move.
I agree with Marie, and just to add to that, again, telling the story. We do a great job in the county talking about all of the great things that go on here, and we talk about so much opportunity and so much success. You don't hear a lot about the challenges and the problems. So yeah, telling the story. And I think that will help engage people to be a part of the solution.
My only comment, my brother's a veteran, so I'm so very sensitive to that point. And I think part of when you think about homelessness, and it's a topic, right? But that individual has more issues than just being homeless. Mm-hmm. There's food, there is education. All of those things come into play, and so you're having to put in play not just solving that one problem, which is back to my earlier point around how do you get philanthropy, government, and business focused on a topic, and then allowing them to have the innovation and great ideas come out and address this at chambers of commerce. How often do you think that topic gets addressed there? And I think the nonprofit community should be getting on those agendas and bringing that topic to those chambers, bringing those topics, as I know you do, to county government. But also you've got organizations that support you like the Community Foundation, and you ask for, let's have a forum and talk about this topic, because it's not just one topic. It's all about that individual's homelessness, their hunger, their educational opportunities, and the inequities that they do face, especially veterans. That's a national problem. My brother right now, who is in Atlanta, has, I think, brought these things together because he has brought philanthropy into this veteran organization. He created a company, got the not only AT&T, but JP Morgan involved to help him build a data center and a call center where he trains these veterans, gives them job opportunities, and guess what? They now have places to live because they don't have jobs that they can actually afford.
Just as a quick follow-up, it's a huge partnership with the county government and other nonprofits, but we receive funding to house 20 veteran households who were not eligible for VA benefits. All but one are African American. Yeah. So that, to me, and these are veterans who have had challenge in accessing Department of Veterans Affairs benefits. So thank you very much for your feedback.
Thank you for your question. Next.
Hi, I'm Tonda Taylor Bean. I'm with Wisdom in Minutes. I do training for youth development and parenting. And I have a fondness for the stories and for having examples that go deep. So my question to you is, which figures, because right now we have a lot of public figures who are known more for celebrity than for mastery and achievement. So my question to you is, when you look at the public figures and the stories you can share, which figures pop out for you as examples of mastery and achievement?
Wow.
That's harder than it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in.
I could actually answer that one.
Before Marie says it, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump in and say that when I think about public figures, none really come to mind except for the president and his family. Because for me, I think that's a story that whether you agree with his policies, whether you voted for him or not, it's a story that for our community, I think will have benefits for generations and generations to come, because young people are seeing access and opportunity to something before we could never imagine. And so to see an educated family, a black family that most of us grew up with, you didn't see it on TV. If you didn't live it, you didn't think we existed. But we have those families that weren't shown on TV, but now it's being forced on the public. You have to see, unless you turn the TV off, you have to see articulate, beautiful black family striving to do the best that they can do, whether you believe in their policies and politics or not.
Okay, so I was going to say actually a local example would be Dr. Darian Pollard from Montgomery College, who grew up in poverty and has overcome that and is an amazing example of what happens when you have access to opportunity. Another person that I would say on a local level that I think has done some amazing work is Ashana Smith, who runs Urban Alliance, which is a nonprofit that helps youth actually with internships. So there's a bunch of local big, actually regional nonprofits that has some amazing leaders, but those are two that I would actually talk about.
So I'm not big on national figures because, again, I believe it all happens locally. And when I think about Montgomery County and the fact that in this county we've elected to 3 terms now, one of the finest, I think, men that the state of Maryland has ever known. Whatever his ambitions have been or were, he focused them here in Montgomery County, and I think has allowed the transition of what has, getting you ready for what was the future of a minority majority in this county, and recognizing that, and again, I was in Prince George's County in college. I watched white flight. I watched a community turn from having balance to having no balance. And that didn't happen here in Montgomery County. And I think that's a lot to do with the leadership that we've had in this county. And I credit Ike Leggett with a lot of that. So I've had an opportunity to hear his story on many occasions, and I can go to tears every time I hear it, because I think he's just a fabulous human being. So.
Education, hard work, and a spiritual compass, Mr. Leggett. 4 degrees, so we talked about education, a White House fellow, military officer, hard work, committed, ethical. I agree with you.
I like to just say, and a lawyer, that's right. And I like to just add one more piece to that, because I think that we can talk about national figures, we can talk about local leaders. Sometimes, though, to some, that's very unattainable. I think we also have to talk about our family leaders. You know, I talked about my parents and my grandparents, and we all have parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. Someone in your family is a leader for your family, and I think talking about that as well is should be a part of the conversation.
I might give you just one more, because I think it's important, and I'd be remiss if I didn't. So my brother I keep referring to, who I'm here because of, because as you heard earlier, when young black boys get into trouble, it happens. And I had my brother who was in my ear, in my face, making sure I wasn't 6 inches off the path, trying to get where he thought I should be. And it was hard to deny, because again, my brother retired from the United States Army as the 4th African American 4-star in the history of the Army, and the first. Thank you. And the first to graduate from a historically black college. So if he's not there setting the example, letting me know what's absolutely possible, you don't see me sitting here having this incredible conversation with you today.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Hello, my name is Nikki Thompson. I'm in Congressman Van Hollen's office, and I had a question centered around the generational gap. I wanted to know your advice on closing that gap, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship and equity.
Wow. Well, I have this conversation a lot with my dad. And we talk about the need for, and he wasn't always in this place, he's here now, but the need for the incredible leaders in our community and in companies who are running companies and nonprofits today to take a step back and to stand alongside some younger leaders and help bring people forward. I think for a very long time, my parents' generation, because they had to fight so hard to get to where they got, because all of what we're doing now is because of them, it's been very difficult for them to take a step back. But if the leaders, the older generation that's in place now, doesn't take a step back while they're still able to teach and bring along the next generation, then there will be a void of leadership. And I think that's being noticed in a lot of nonprofits. I've had a lot of conversation with folks in the nonprofit community about there are no young people to step into place. And my question to them always is, whether it's black, white, or whatever, so when did you invite somebody to the table? When did you take somebody in and say, hey, I see that you're real interested in this. Let me help teach you, bring you along. Let me partner with you so you can learn. So I think that's a big part of it.
So I would say, one of the last things I did before I took over the role at Leadership Montgomery was I published a study on disconnected youth and African American population here in Montgomery County. And one of the recommendations that we talked about in the study was the need to gather and support parents within the youth, because they don't have the idea of, how do I fill out a FAFSA? I didn't know that my kid could actually apply for this program. I don't know how to advocate in the school system so that my child can take this extra class so that she can do X, Y, and Z. Personal example is my child wanted to take a 9th class and had to petition to take an extra class, which makes no sense. She wanted to learn more. But it's because I knew how to teach her how to rally and advocate for herself. So in terms of this taking a step back, we need to really support parents and help them to understand they need to be their own advocates for their children so that they can have the opportunities.
And my point is right back to my earlier comments around how business leaders right now, we have to first lose these kids today attitude. We have to recognize that it wasn't us who brought us Google or Uber, it were these young people. And in order for those young people to feel inspired in Black communities, in Asian communities, in Hispanic communities, they have to have models of us accepting who they are. And they're going to create different economies than we did. They're seeing work differently than we did. We lived because our jobs where we got out and that's the first thing, yeah, what do you do? The question they want to know is, are you happy? And so part of what we have to recognize is they are different people. They're going to need different tools. And we've got something to give them, but I also think we can learn a lot from them. And from what we learn, listen first and then give the advice. Because if you go in with, this is how I did it, more than likely you lose them. I don't know that it works for them. So I think you have to listen first, use the experiences that you have to help guide them, but let them spring, let them come up.
Thank you, thank you.
This up a little bit. Everyone is bending over like this. Anyway, good morning, I think.
Good morning.
I don't know if it's morning or afternoon, but hello. My name is Lorna Ford, and I serve on both the Montgomery County and the State of Maryland Commission for Women. And I am standing here this morning because I have a concern about women and the disparities of pay that women face in business. And as you may or may not know, there are more female graduates than male graduates, but then when they get out into the workplace, they have to deal with the disparities of equal pay for equal work. So my question to you is, what can the commission do? You see the women that are coming into your respective organizations. What can the commission do to prepare the women? You know, obviously they'll be educated and they'll have some other skills to even get in the door, but what can we do to further prepare our women to enter into the workforce to deal with the disparities that we know are already there, and just help them to have a leg up on what they're dealing with and what they're going to face and how they can overcome that.
So I'll actually start this one, primarily because my company, Social and Scientific Systems, we're a public health research company. And we employ mostly nurses, MPHs, physicians as well, researchers. And we're about 75% women. So there's a great affinity I have for trying to make sure that they are prepared for leadership, because more than likely that's who's going to replace me at some point. And so we basically are creating programs where we do invite different speakers to come in and talk to our company about leadership, helping them understand what they need to do in this world that is not built for them always, and create those opportunities. You know, right there as we bring in new health practitioners to say, here's somebody you're going to be teamed up with. They're going to guide you through some of these things, and then at some point they're going to leave that one and go be mentored by yet another woman who is got other skills. So I think the conversation points that you got to make, at least in the businesses, is that, okay, it's not fair, it's not even. We do everything we can here because we pay close attention to the whole equity issue around salaries in our company. But I think making them aware of the opportunities that are not only inside our company, but I've placed at least 2 in other organizations where they're now, chief operating officers or chief financial officers. So I think you're doing the right things by keeping the conversation open. It's all about possible and letting them know that this is possible. Do not give up just because somebody says no.
And so I would add, you need to research and negotiate. Because we don't research what the last person was paid and we don't negotiate. You need to hold out for your worth every single time.
That's true.
And just to close out, because I know we only have a few seconds, I would also say encourage them to start their own businesses.
There you go.
Absolutely.
Boss is your own boss.
Perfect.
You're absolutely perfect.
Thank you.
Best boss is your own boss.
Thank you for the questions and thank you for your responses. Now we're going to hear from Cheryl. Cheryl, would you come back and just wrap it for us? Tell us where we are on this project and what your vision is for the future.
All righty, so we're going to work a little techno magic here. Too much techno. Okay, so when we left Reverend Henson, he was in Canada. He had become extraordinarily famous and known worldwide, and Canada built this exceptionally large facility to commemorate his life. Well, we here in Montgomery County are working on an equally exceptionally large facility to celebrate his life. It will be the new Josiah Henson Park, and it is located right down the street and on Old Georgetown Road, as we saw. But to give you a little historical perspective, I have like half a minute, and so I'm gonna like zoom through these. But to put it into a historical perspective for you of what we have available on our current park and what was there, what you see, the map on the left there was the historic 1872 map of what Isaac Riley's property looked like. We're talking nearly 300 acres, where we now have just under 3 acres that we are working towards developing into a major museum. So that red dot is the tiny area that's us, and in the blue is where we began with 1.5 acres. This is the facility today, that log wing that is attached. We are now on the National Register for Historic Places. This is the Riley Bolton House that you're taking a look at, its exterior and its interior. And what we do with programming today, because we are open. We're open next weekend. We have a program coming up. We want you all to come out to the site, meet our guides on Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 4. Lyrical Rhythms, 3 to 4 on Saturday. Shameless plug. But we have an ongoing archaeological investigation at this site, and we're very happy for that opportunity to show the public how we reach this level of interpretation. And it's not done just in a library or in archives, but that we have folks in the field literally digging up the history that we share with our visitors. We also engage in school programs during the week. We are open and have school programs from February through November, weather cooperating, or we cooperating with weather. And we have just a couple of images there from our site during our school programs, our archaeological digs. In 2012, we were featured by a national firm that does these sort of flash 72-hour archaeological investigations called Time Team America out of Oregon. And they came to the Josiah Henson Park and helped us to do extensive, quick, down and dirty investigations, and got inside of our log kitchen and helped us to determine, well, that's not the only thing that's there. This 1850s log kitchen, there's much more below the soil and below the earth. So we will be showing the documentary from that visit from 2012 when you come out to the site. Now, our interpretive themes for the park are going to focus around the words of Reverend Henson through his autobiography. We'll be looking at the life of slavery. We'll be looking at the Riley plantations in the county. We will begin the conversations of tackling stereotypes and how we move from the historical novel Uncle Tom's Cabin to the real Reverend Josiah Henson, to the negative connotations of the words Uncle Tom. The park today, in 2010, we were approved for a master plan, and with that master plan, it was here that we worked towards to expand the historic house of just the Riley Bolton House to encompass a visitor center, so that when people came to the property, they would be able to safely enter the property, as well as enjoy the experience as close as we could get them back to the 19th century. So if I could, on this upper map here what we have from our facilities plan that has taken place. We're going to build a visitor center, about 2,900 square feet, one story, to complement the historic structure so that when visitors come to the site, you're going to be walking in the footsteps of Father Henson. You're going to be entering the property from the yard behind the big house. And that's because this would have been the entrance of the enslaved. Never would they have come through the front of the house. So we want to engage our visitors as Reverend Henson would have met them, and that would have been at the back of the house, not to mention it's the most beautiful part of the property and away from Old Georgetown Road. So with that, this is just a concept of what the visitor center would look like. We have two options that we began reviewing there in our one story. We want to make sure that we have a multipurpose theater where we can show a brief orientation film of about 5 to 8 minutes, which is going to explore Reverend Henson's life here in Montgomery County. The Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site had done a beautiful piece on his life, and they were like, yep, and he was born in Maryland, Charles County, moved to Montgomery County, boom, and now he's in Canada. We're like, wait, there's a whole chapter missing, like 40 years. So we want to help visitors understand what that Maryland experience was like. So with our options, we will have the multipurpose theater, and with that we'll show the film, but it offers a space where we can have community gatherings, as well as a retail area, another small exhibition area, and then you'll see courtyards in the front and the back, because the key part to having this visitor center is that we provide a safe access for buses to bring in children from school groups as well as large visitor groups on passenger buses off of Old Georgetown Road, unload the passengers, let folks sort of navigate their way into the park via the visitor center, and then walk around the grounds to the back where there were going to be archaeological areas that will be a part of our permanent exhibit. There'll be outdoor exhibits that are going to include demonstration crops where we can look at what were we growing during the 19th century on this particular area. Just an example of two types of exhibits. One of the exterior exhibits, when the visitor comes into the park area, we're introducing them to the story of Josiah Henson and following into the Reverend's footsteps through a slave quarter representation there, where we can begin to take them back to the 19th century and have them embrace what this experience would have been like to live in the time period. The lower image shows what we're doing to the main house. Because it is a historic structure, we're not altering it, and we're not taking the entire structure back to the 19th century look. We're maintaining its 1930s exterior and interior historical architecture. But what we're doing, there is a side porch where this is going to be part of the entrance for visitors, your main entrance. And so when you come in, your orientation to Reverend Henson and his life and the period in which he lived will be done via a timeline. And we're hoping that that will be a multimedia form of a timeline. And then the house itself, this is not a period home where you're going to go back and see it as the Rileys lived there. What we will do is we will utilize this historical structure as a shell in order to place modern state-of-the-art exhibits that will be multimedia on its first level. It will be completely ADA accessible. And then the log kitchen, we will take that to the 19th century and look at that 1850s time period and what an actual log kitchen might have looked like, and then saving a little bit of that archaeological excavation area so we can mix the modern and the past. So you see how we got to this interpretation. The final thing that I want to leave you with our new Josiah Henson Park is that it is part of a larger story that Montgomery County tells in presenting the historic African American experience. With the acquisition of the new Josiah Henson Park, we are now able to focus on that slave experience in Montgomery County in Maryland, because we are still sort of surprised that people are coming into the area not realizing that Maryland was a slave state. And just because we're a border state doesn't mean anything changes for us. We're still very Southern. And so this site offers us an opportunity to look at this lens of enslavement through Father Henson's eyes, growing up on this plantation. We have other sites which will help us interpret the resistance to slavery. This self-emancipation that Reverend Henson took upon himself and his family is one that is definitely tied to the Underground Railroad, both he who utilized it and as a conductor. We have a site, a new facility which opens in June to the public. Our visitor center at the Woodlawn Manor Cultural Park in Sandy Spring is an area where we're going to focus on the Underground Railroad experience, free Black communities post the Civil War, as well as this early community that's grown up in Sandy Spring, as well as the Quakers, who make up a large part of this area of the county. We'll be looking at these stories and how all of them intermingle. And then finally, we are able to tell the story of Reconstruction era. What does freedom look like, really? We have our Oakley Cabin African American Museum and Park, one of our oldest African American sites we've been interpreting over 20 years in Olney, what was historic Brookville. And we also have the Thomas Harper Cabin, which is located in downtown Wheaton at the Brookville Nature Center. The Harper Cabin is one that was moved from the Jonesville, Poolsville area. Yeah, see, you never heard of it. Didn't know it was there. I saw it on your faces. They're like, where? It's tucked in the back up the hill is the Harper Cabin, and we still have Harper descendants that come and participate. And then with Oakley Cabin in Brookville, you've passed by it too, right on Brookville Road. It was one of 3 cabins which made up a cluster of homes that free Black tenant farmers lived in post-Civil War. It's built during the enslavement period, but with the research and history that we have, it's rich in identifying who those families were, what work they did, and that's what we explore at those sites. So again, we want to thank MCM and Montgomery Parks Foundation for taking on this endeavor to help us make this a world-class international place to come and visit. You must not leave Montgomery County until you have stopped at the Josiah Henson Park, taking a hike on the Underground Railroad Trail, and work on weaving some baskets over at Oakley Cabin and visit with family at Harper's Cabin. So I thank you this morning for your patience and letting me ramble.
What we'd like to do is to take that enthusiasm and knowledge that Cheryl has, bottle it, and then put it at everybody's home in Montgomery County so that they get the feeling. So thank you for your overall presentation. We appreciate it a lot. We also want to thank everyone who came today. I personally want to thank the steering committee and Julie Carter for all that you do to make this project go forward. We have a lot of work to do. We have $2 million to raise. I know that we will do it, and thank you. I want to thank Mike from Montgomery Parks for coming today. Your support is incredibly important. And Michael from the foundation, thank you for your support and your encouragement to push the project forward. As I said, we have a lot of work to do, particularly in raising the awareness of the incredible history and the gifts that we have here in Montgomery County. It is just incredible. Like I said earlier, when I learned about it, it was like who, where, how. We must make this a big thing in our county. And our committee, our steering committee, will work diligently with you to make that happen. Every one of you have a brochure. Raise your brochure, please. Yes, yes. Look in your brochure, and there are opportunities to give. There are opportunities to be involved, to get involved, and to make a difference. So we thank you today. We thank the panel. Thank you for your time and your interest. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest, and we will count on your support going forward. Have a wonderful day. Thank you guys. You guys were really